Israeli forces pushed further into Gaza City, but there's relatively little information coming out from the front. Netanyahu rejected a ceasefire, and U.S. troops were attacked 7 more times across the Middle East. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 8:30 a.m. Central on Tuesday, November 7th, 2023. Over the past 24 hours, Israel says that 30 rockets were fired from Lebanon in their north. Hamas claimed that 16 of those came from their Lebanon branch, whereas the rest, the other 14, would have been fired from Hezbollah. In response, the Israeli Air Force struck those launch sites as well as additional Hezbollah targets all across southern Lebanon. Now, there's been no new mention of any Israeli casualties over the last 24 hours in terms of the official notices put out on Israeli websites. The Gaza Health Ministry, through Al Jazeera, published that 10,022 Palestinians have so far been killed in Gaza, with 25,408 wounded, adding that 2,660 remain missing under the rubble. Now, shifting over to the ground operation, we've got the map here from War Mapper on Twitter that was updated in the past 24 hours. You can see the IDF continues to push into Gaza City from multiple directions, and the focus right now on the ground operation is certainly in the northern half of the Gaza Strip. Now, there's not a lot of information coming out from the front lines right now. We are getting daily video and image dumps both from Israel and Hamas, but the IDF press releases are pretty sparse, or maybe vague is a better way to put it, which, you know, on the one hand, you might say that is to maintain the element of surprise. You don't want to give away operational secrets. Got it. But it's out of line with what we've seen in modern war. So, you know, if you go to the U.S. experiences in Mosul against Islamic State, or even parts of the wars that the U.S. was involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were pretty regular situation updates to the press corps, right? They weren't giving away tactically significant information, but all things considered, it was relatively open, kind of recognizing that the world wants to know what's happening in the middle of a war zone. That's not really the case here. You know, there are press releases, there are announcements coming out from Israel, but it's much higher level, right? You're seeing things talking about how Hamas is using hospitals to store munitions, or the tunnel networks, or how Israel has told the Gaza civilians to evacuate to the south. But in terms of number of Hamas terrorists killed and operations executed, even Israeli casualties to a degree, that information is just not part of the daily debriefings, at least not from anything that I've seen. Now, I wouldn't read too much into that, right? I feel like people could take that any direction they want. It's just notable that the information, the official information coming out of Gaza right now is pretty minimal. Now, shifting over to some Hamas media that's come out in the past couple days, we got this first one here showing Hamas mortar teams firing on Israeli forces. This is much more like it, as opposed to the video yesterday that I showed, which was pretty choreographed, very clean cut. There was drone footage, ammo storage points sitting out there in the open, sandbag firing points. That's not how the current fight is being waged in Gaza. It's just not realistic. This is. So we've got mortar teams firing from, thick vegetation where they can't be seen from aircraft overhead. You've got some of these mortars firing from either underground or inside of a building with a hole in the roof. This is how insurgents engage conventional forces in a place like Gaza, right? Not out there in the open in broad daylight, but finding ways to conceal their firing positions to where they can get those rounds off, exit the area, and live to fight another day. Hamas also put out a couple videos showing some of their elements engaging Israeli vehicles with RPGs. And on that note, somebody should tell Israel to stop putting those little red triangles over their tanks. It just makes them way too easy to see. But the caption of this video was, quote, Al-Qassam Mujahideen clashed with the forces invading northwest of Beit Lahia and destroy a number of vehicles, end quote. But as we move through this clip, all we really see are detonations from behind cover. There's no burned out tanks, no pieces of vehicles scattered along the road. Now, Israel has something called the Trophy Active Protection System, which very high level, in short, shoots down projectiles headed towards the tank. So it's entirely possible anytime that you see a blast next to one of these Israeli armored vehicles that it's not the warhead impacting the armor and destroying the vehicle, but the active protection system actually doing its job and stopping the projectile before it hits the tank. Now, Trophy is, just like everything else, is not 100% effective, so maybe not. So maybe some of those are impacting the side of the vehicles, and from those that strike home, some of them likely are causing damage and even casualties, but not all the time. Remember, these tanks and armored vehicles are designed to come under fire. Getting shot at is expected. So even when one is hit, it doesn't automatically mean that the vehicle is destroyed and the entire crew is killed. The reason I bring all that up is that we're seeing a lot of statements put out by Hamas talking about the vast number of Israeli vehicles they've destroyed, along with some of this footage of detonations occurring right next to the vehicle. Again, that could be the vehicle getting struck or could be the active protection system. But what we're not seeing, and you got to think that if this exists, Hamas would just be plastering this all over the internet, are very many destroyed or disabled Israeli vehicles in and around Gaza. Now, the IDF put out this footage of civilians fleeing Gaza to the south. It was a couple days ago when Israel cut off Gaza City to the south, all approaches and exits. And right about that point, they started announcing certain windows of time where they would allow civilians to exit that encirclement, which, look, it's positive. Civilians leaving the battlefield is positive. And I understand that's going to be contentious and received a bunch of different ways. Long term, it'd be great if all of them are able to come back to their homes, and hopefully that's the plan. But they've already been under bombardment for 4+ weeks, and they've held on. But the fight is coming. The urban fight is coming. Israeli forces are already pushing into Gaza City from multiple directions. The house-to-house, room-to-room combat, very deadly, borderline hand-to-hand combat is right around the corner. And the more civilians, the more men, women, and children that can leave that area, the better. It's not good for Hamas. Hamas would like them to be there. It provides, more difficulty for Israeli forces to move through. But again, it's going to be an active battlefield. It's already an active battlefield. Get civilians out of there, potentially reduce the total number of civilian casualties. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu gave an interview on ABC yesterday where he talked about the possibilities of a ceasefire in and around Gaza, as well as what the future of Gaza will look like after this operation. He said, quote, "There will be no ceasefire, no general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. I think it will hamper the war effort. It'll hamper our effort to get our hostages out because the only thing that works on these criminals in Hamas is the military pressure that we're exerting." That's pretty consistently been what Israel has said from the opening of this war. The calls for ceasefire were near immediate. Like day one of the bombings, people were calling for a ceasefire. And right away, Israel said, no ceasefire until those hostages are out. So it's nothing too surprising, but there's definitely been more international calls for, I've seen the term like humanitarian pause. It's like new. Haven't really seen that before in any conflict. But the idea is people pushing to get more humanitarian aid in, medical equipment, maybe fuel, water, food like that to the civilians. Israel continues to draw a pretty hard line there. Get the hostages out, and then we can talk. And then in terms of control of Gaza after this war operation wraps up, Netanyahu said, "I think Israel will, for an indefinite period of time, will have the overall security responsibility because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine." There's been a lot of conversation about this in recent days. So if we're kind of mincing words here, Netanyahu's talking about security in Hamas. He's not necessarily talking about governance. Hamas is the governing authority in Gaza right now. And Israel's stated goal during this operation is the complete elimination of Hamas. So if they were able to push a button and Hamas is gone, understand that Israel would want to control that security situation to make sure no other group is able to fester in the aftermath and carry out something like October 7th. But the overall governance, the day-to-day lives of the Palestinian people there, there's been some speculation it could be an international coalition, some pushing for more of an Arab-led international coalition. But that is, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it does seem like Netanyahu's focus right now, which understandably so in the middle of a war, is the security responsibility. Still not seeing a lot about what the future governance, the future status of Gaza will look like. Now, shifting down south, Yemen, or more specifically the Houthi forces in Yemen, said that they attacked Israel. But it's not clear that Israel knows that they were attacked. So the quote was, "The Yemeni armed forces, with the help of God Almighty, launched a batch of drones during the past hours at various sensitive targets of the Israeli enemy in the occupied territories." Israel has been pretty quick to announce when they're making interceptions over the Red Sea or just outside of their airspace or in their airspace in the past. It's happened more than once. No mention as of this point. So I don't know if those drones were shot down by U.S. forces somewhere in the Middle East or if the launch didn't happen at all. But either way, there you have it. Yemen says they attacked Israel. Not clear that actually took place. Now, on the U.S. front, we're now tracking 38 total attacks against U.S. forces by Iranian-backed militias since October 17th across Iraq and Syria. That number 38 is an increase of 7 over the past 3 days. So U.S. officials put out that on Sunday, there were 5 rocket attacks and a drone attack at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq and across 2 different locations in Syria. The U.S. officials added that most of these attacks have been thwarted, and most of the time the munitions fail to reach their destination. That last piece there, fail to reach their destination, kind of vague if that means that the rockets just missed or crashed before they reached the U.S. facility, or if they were actively shot down by some form of U.S. air defense. But either way, those attacks against U.S. forces and facilities in the Middle East are not stopping. If anything, they are starting to slowly increase in recent days. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. 7 to 10 of the top articles each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.